Good afternoon to all the audience, and thanks to the organizing committee for letting me present this work orally. My name is Bernabé Moreno, and I am representing the Científica del Sur University. First, I will briefly focus on the occupational background for Peruvian scientific divers, developing a case of a country with an incipient diving program. Then I will summarize the diving operations executed throughout our existence as a scientific diving team. Let's dive in. Compared to other international schemes, the low number of Peruvian regulations are quite recent. In 1987, this law was issued for accident coverage in extractive activities. 1 year after, the supplementary risk work insurance was created for accident at work. However, it didn't include activities such as artisanal diving. It was not until the year 2008 that they recognized the diseases caused by physical agents such as those happening under hyperbaric conditions. In 2014, the Supreme Decree regulated the strengthening of the armed forces, and it was created to supervise and certify the training and competency qualification of workers in the aquatic environment. Divers were classified in 4 categories, and the name of scientific diver, the letter C, appears for the very first time in this document, which is a very important first step to know where to be allocated. This directorial resolution published the occupational medical record of fitness for diving, and in the Appendix 3 they included 10 exam syllabi, 7 of which were dedicated for the professional divers category, and only 1 of them for the scientific divers. However, it has a very poor description of the content, so there's no the necessary regulation, monitoring, or follow-up for those organizations conducting scientific endeavors under hyperbaric conditions. Contrastingly, looking at the South American region, we have a good example, which is Chile. In 2014, they published the 3rd edition of the diving regulation for professional divers. In this country, scientific divers are included under the category of specialist divers, and they have a longer list of regulations, protocols, and quality standards. Across the ponds, there are even better backgrounds. For example, the approved code of practice and guidance for scientific and archaeological diving projects published by the HSC of the UK, or the CMAS standard, or the operations of scientific divers published by the German Commission, just to name a few. To summarize the situation in Peru, we lack several things. There's the absence of doctrinal development and incipient jurisprudential development. We need to systematize and, for example, make a census of all scientific divers in the country. For this, the involvement of the government is urgently needed. We also need to strengthen the capabilities on health and risk assessments. However, in the absence of all these points, individual units and scientific diving teams can start developing our own strategies based on highly functional international schemes adapted to our needs. So, having mentioned the occupational background in Peru, I feel the potential learning curve actually looks very promising. As an analogy, I like to compare this curve with a controlled eco profile during a tech dive, and I reckon this is a nourishing process and should be taken step by step. For example, being able to dive with the IOPAN scientific diving team 2 years ago in Poland showed me a wee bit on how operations should be carried out overall, the organization of the teams, the forms needed to be signed with anticipation, etc. I would also like to highlight the importance of risk assessment in diving which I learned through my involvement with the Harry Watts scientific diving team in Scotland. Here, I subjected myself to the HSC medical examination and assessment of divers and successfully passed. Too bad the pandemic let me just get to this point, but not further. Actually, this current conference also contributes to that curve, and my plan is to use any new information and apply it to the Científica Divers team. So I hope I was able to synthesize the incipient occupational background for us Peruvian divers. For the second part of this talk, we provide a semi-quantitative retrospective outlook of the overall research conducted under hyperbaric conditions, covering a time span between 2007 and this year. One common mistake during this time was the lack of metadata systematization, which is key for quantitative analysis. Nevertheless, physical and digital logbooks, photographic files, and other documentation were revised. This effort was done to have a perspective on the trends and make a statement on what we aim as a scientific diving team for the next years to come. So we included these details, this information shown in the lower part of the slide. Overall, we've got 46 diving operations as part of 10 projects, several ongoing, 394 person dives, 270 total dives, a quarter of them were SCUBA, and this is clearly visible here, indicated with the blue color. Actually, SCUBA dives are on a secondary axis because the scale was lower. 93% of the dives were either in continental waters or marine environments in Peru, and the remaining 7% were done in the Antarctic Machu Picchu. 5 scientific divers, 3 of which have the CIMA scientific diving certifications, and 5 assisting divers, and in both cases 20% were female. You can clearly see that the majority were surface supply dives, and most of these have occurred in 2018. This is our supply at surface, literally artisanal, and this is the place for serious self-criticism, because the way we've been carrying this out has been quite unsafe. Well, at least we use second stages and take 100% oxygen with us to fieldwork. You will be shocked to learn how these fishermen proceed. Hose directly to the mouth, no demand regulators. But we are now in the process of changing our operating procedures and implementing safer modes, starting to change the hose, the protocols, and our behavior at surface. This diving mode raised its frequency because of the IPA project, and this is not a beer. IPA stands for Pachacama and Asia Islands, and we've been carrying out a lot of research the last 3 years, and actually one of the objectives was to work jointly with artisanal fishermen within these protected polygons. The scary part is over now, so from now on is 100% scuba. In Peru we have the Andes Cordillera, and it's a privilege to visit these sacred water bodies, or cochas in Quechua language, considered as such by ancient civilizations. It may not be precisely an oxymoron, but I personally enjoy being submerged at hyperbaric conditions in hypobaric environments, if that makes any sense. The first two of them happened in Cañete River Basin in Lima Department. This one, Vilca, was at 3,800 meters above sea level, and Muyucocha Lake was at 4,300 meters above sea level. And Muyucocha Lake is the very head of the Cañete River Basin. So this was the highest, 4.3 kilometers above. Here at the bottom we have some example of macroscopic organisms that were collected. And in a different department, we dove in the Lake Barón. Although this was not the highest, it was the coldest and with harder conditions. Perhaps one of the most inspiring too. We could not see much because the visibility was only 1 meter, but it felt amazing the power of the mountain and to dive in a glacial lake. But hyperbaric conditions may lead to acute mountain sickness, or soroche in Quechua. So a conservative approach was considered where gradual acclimation was the premier measure and 100% oxygen intake after dives was the second measure. You can see here my dive buddy resting after a very cold dive. To continue on the line of cold and purely scuba dives, 7 diving operations for 3 projects, the first one in 2007 and the latest 2 years ago, 35 person dives and 6 divers, one of which was female, 18 total dives, the majority for biological sampling. However, some of them accounted for the deployment and retrieval of a sediment trap. The Peruvian army has played a bipolar syndrome. Depending on who's the expedition leader, most of the time they have posed restrictions, but in other opportunities they have provided sound logistic support. I would like to dedicate this slide to women in diving. Through the years, a disparity in their representation has been pretty clear. Almost half of the students of this undergraduate course were females. Despite the initial interest, female students does not seem to continue after this course, and the proportion is evidently low during fieldwork. However, we are taking measures to balance this. To name an example, Daniela Torne, my most recent Antarctic dive buddy, she's the second Peruvian female to have dived in Antarctica. 19 total outputs have been produced, although 4 undergraduate theses were orphaned by their students. The plan is to take the baton ourselves for half of them. 1 undergraduate thesis was defended 2 years ago, and 3 are still in elaboration. 5 conferences, and so far 3 publications and 3 in the process. Almost all diving operations have depended somehow on underwater imagery, and the increase of the utilization of less destructive methods such as photo and video quadrats and time-lapse systems demarks a clear tendency. This, for example, is a very simple and accessible time-lapse system, and which we have deployed around 10 times, most of them in kelp beds. However, we included one in a control system with several high-altitude amphibians. This work represents an initial synthesis to place ourselves under an occupational background and detect trends of the activities conducted by our team. We are very conscious of our mistakes, and we are now pushing towards the establishment of a solid working group with higher standards in the region, aiming towards international collaboration.
I wanted to finish with these side dive logs, which will enable the proper systematization of our data and metadata for the next diving operations. Thanks for listening and for the opportunity.